Okay, so in our previous lesson, we started level 2, and the previous lesson, Free Your Spirit, we began to explore the true nature of the alpha spirit, or the actual self, as spiritual awareness that's capable of experiencing existence from basically any viewpoint. And unfortunately, we seem to fix, of course, our attention and the total considerations of our beingness solely as the human condition. That's what denotes the human condition. But this does not have to be permanent. So here we are in continuing level 2, processing level 2, PC6. So lesson 6 of Pathway to Ascension Volume 1. Or if you're using the booklets, it's the professional course booklet number 6, Escaping Spirit Traps. So why did we name it that? Well, early on our spiritual timeline, then that's what we consider the backtrack, our sense of personal history as an alpha spirit, even preceding this existence, this universe, and so forth. We're knowingly acting as an eternal being with seemingly infinite creative abilities. This is when we were essentially most at cause. And, cause over our own beingness, cause over our creations, and of course our experience of these, what we consider the experience of existence, reality. But, of course, being at cause also means doing or creating things that one may later regret. And this starts a chain of what we call inhibition toward future action and creation, particularly in that area. Experiencing guilt or shame, an individual will start to hold back communications within an area, particularly communications with others about that area. And then accumulated fragmentation like this in specific areas is what led to an alpha spirit restricting their own active abilities and their willingness to reach, and increasingly withdrawing as cause. So in Systemology Level 2, our systematic processing emphasis is on the doing things, which is to say the things we have done. It's only after the area of doing things is confronted easily that we will then consider any kind of additional matters such as like ethics or justification and our own responsibility over them. But when the subject is initially raised, and we do this again incrementally on a gradient scale, we talk about, what have you done, or, things we've regretted. Most of the times, the first things that come to mind are going to be about serious crimes, or those serious, or even our conceptions of evil. But really, that's only a small part. Treating that kind of ethic or morality is really only a small part of spiritual rehabilitation. The truth is, when we look at the backtrack, that we once begin to hold back or inhibit certain areas or channels reactively or on automatic, we stop knowingly being at cause for that entire area. And then we miss out also on the experience of the good things too. But this is, again, when we're treating the pathway to ascension, we're talking about a systematic descent from which a godlike being has become entrapped within the human condition. So we're at one level, we're treating the things that, of course, we have done in this lifetime. But when we talk about the rehabilitation of high-level spiritual power, we're talking about things that, for one reason or another, we ourselves have essentially shut off in sequence in order to eventually come down to these accumulated considerations that have, again, led to us being entrapped within the human condition. So, we started when we were doing Free Your Spirit in the last lesson, we started dealing with some imaginative creativeness processes, various exercises, to kind of balance out some of the more intensive subjective processing that we were doing in level 1, treating human problems. Now, at this point, in order to actually complete processing level 2, we kind of got to dig right in and start peeling back layers of, starting with what can easily be recalled and what we can consider, much as we did with, for example, communication in level 0. The goal here, again, is to break through various barriers or fragmentation that inhibits a seeker's free consideration and willingness. So in later processing levels, a seeker can be more concerned with what they're interested in the should and shouldn'ts, or what they're going to do or not do. What we're ultimately trying to figure out here is a way of defragmenting the entire area and being able to free up those considerations, once and for all. So, again, with systematic processing, you should be familiar by now with systematic processing. We're concerned with spotting, which means identifying and noticing something about, in this case, a particular action. And then we're going to observe it to see if there's any particular resistance to thinking about it, or any emotional turbulence that's attached to, considerations of that action. And, on a higher level of application, again, we're talking about doing this on a gradient scale to the point where we're rehabilitating the native spiritual ability of the individual, but this has of course been wrapped in many layers and lifetimes worth of restrictive fragmentation. And of course, it's this that is inhibiting our true knowingness of that state. When we can reclaim that true knowingness, in self-honesty and in its actuality as it is, then we can actually treat it or practice it. But it requires an individual actually having access to that part of themselves again, to understand that this is a native ability, not something that's being learned or added on. We're actually pulling things away in which to uncover that which is the underneath, what would be sequentially the oldest, most native, basic, original aspect of ourselves before any other considerations were later applied. So, in some ways, when we start to deal with things of this nature, where it comes down to something that, what an individual's done, there is some benefit to starting off with flying solo. And then, of course, if you're even in traditional piloting, having an individual fly solo and then processing out any remaining turbulent fragmentation using traditional piloting, using a co-pilot. Mainly because the effectiveness of some of this really concerns how open an individual is to accessing, confronting, and in the case of processing, actually communicating it, whether it's down on paper or to another individual, to a co-pilot. And so we don't, in order to do this, it's in the same level of what, and not to bring it into the equation, but in a religious ideal, it would be the same thing in terms of the rites of reconciliation or confession, so to speak, where one is basically getting a sense of relief for the very fact that they're able to communicate something to someone else. The penance aspect of it and the religious factor of it is usually not what is effective in this. Remember, in Systemology, we've been able to isolate if a practice was effective, what was effective about it. And it's not the mythology or the prayer or contemplation. Or in most cases, for example, Catholicism, the confessional type work is fairly scripted. And so we're not even really concerned about counseling. Here we found that the effectiveness wasn't in any kind of advice even really given. It was the fact that an individual was able to pull up and confront that which they had done and could communicate it. They were no longer holding back or holding in that area. They could communicate it. And it is for that reason alone that there is any therapeutic, any therapeutic element, effective element to that practice. And so in this case, when we're treating processing, we're treating self-honesty, we're treating beta defragmentation, it's pretty necessary that an individual is not holding back, is able to freely communicate these things and confront them and process them without being any kind of concerns about judgment or what another individual might say or do. And in the cases of some of these exercises, if they're being done solo, an individual may record certain elements, if they prefer, in their standard journal, but a lot of this can also be done just on separate sheets of paper, of which can be, burned or destroyed thereafter, so that the processing has taken place to where an individual has been able to confront it, deal with it, do the exercises, write things out, see it external from them, but there it ends, and there's no reason, there's no reason, except for negative ones, unfortunately, but there would be no reason for any permanent accounts of such a record to remain thereafter. So that's before even getting into the processes themselves. These were things that I wanted to basically point out because we're going to be dealing with stuff now at level 2 in order to complete level 2, where we're starting to get into some significant areas. So in the first, of course, we start off lightly as always, using the gradient scale. And the first is really just kind of an exploration of getting into the area. We're looking at 2 elements of it. They're, in essence, almost kind of like 2 flows, but they're really just 2 elements of it, and then they're treated as, with the circuits. So the first is willingness to do, and the PCL is what would you be willing to do, what would you be willing to have someone do, and the third, what would you be willing to have others do. And bless you there. Willingness to reveal. What would you be willing to reveal? What would you be willing to have someone reveal? And what would you be willing to have others reveal? And then, again, here we're going to run through just some PCL of another process. And this, again, this is one of those areas where, after we've softened it up with what I just gave you, then we kind of dig in. And we want to be able to run through this without concerns that someone else will find out, and we actually deal with that in this level as well. The kind of turbulent energy attached, not really so much over what we've done, but over the energy, the attention awareness that's being held there, over the concern that someone else may find out, is actually where a lot of the fragmentation comes in. See, fragmentation is a tricky thing until we were able to systematically deconstruct it. It isn't always the reasons or in the way that one might expect. So in this case, it's the holding back and the holding out that in the long run is actually what's been far more detrimental to the alpha spirit, to this godlike being, as opposed to what they've actually done. So it's in isolating and confronting what we've done that we were able to defragment these other considerations about it. So the 4 PCL here, what shouldn't others know about you, and who would it be safe to communicate that to? And then what shouldn't someone know about others, and who would it be safe to communicate that to? And although it seems like they're actually that these should be alternated within the pairs, it's actually, we found it more effective to run through all 4 as a cycle and then run 4 again. So those again, what shouldn't others know about you? Who would it be safe to communicate that to? What shouldn't someone know about others? And who would it be safe to communicate that to? So again, we're pulling in communication in with this too. We haven't completely dismissed the element of communication within our processing. We've just actually been adding some things. So once you've kind of treated this as a general exploration and processing, and have approached the general idea, then you can directly apply, the elements of systematic processing, the like specific terminals, so the persons, places, things, and so forth. So, as a standard, we always start by processing the basic terminals that represent the spheres of existence. So if you remember your basic course lesson on spheres of existence, your list of terminals or associations with those spheres of existence and so forth, for example, starting with one, self, terminals for that, for example, being the body, the second sphere, home, terminals, a family member, children, so forth. So I'm not going to run through all those again. The reason why we bring in those fundamentals early in is because, as I promised you, they were going to come up over and over again, and so there you have it. And then run through all your basic terminals, and then on an additional pass, like an advanced pass, when you're going through these levels again for beta defragmentation, then consider also using creation and destruction, which are actually concepts, not necessarily terminals, but you want to be, if we're talking about, once you've established beta defragmentation, because I know we're not going to get too far into the advanced training course within this particular segment of workshops, we're trying to at least get through level 4. So, when we're talking about alpha defragmentation, we're talking about one that's already established, a baseline state of defragmentation with the human condition, is then working on those advanced levels. We're concerned with what they have done in terms of creation and destruction. And of course, we start with what's accessible within just this lifetime, and then that kind of opens up the chains to consider other things. And then again, as we mentioned in many times prior, and we'll probably stop again. That's why we want to get you these fundamentals really good and solid before, everyone's always concerned with, what's the next level or the advanced training or whatever. On the pathway of 0 to 8, by processing level 4, at the end of processing level 4, an individual should be fairly well, if not have already established, but beta defragmentation. Reached a state of beta defragmentation where they're not compulsively compelled to the human condition. That doesn't mean they just suddenly cease to exist. And we have other stuff to help stabilize and work beyond that. But again, this is done on a gradient scale. It's done so for a reason. That's why we call it systemology. And let's see. So the terminals that, the basic terminals, these are just treating general examples, concerning the spheres of existence. But with the similar but more specific terminals, you kind of want to deal with, for example, a husband, in place of the family member, or housekeeping in place of work, or an automobile, for example, would represent the sphere of physical matter. Treating them again kind of as a general terminal rather than a specific individual. This helps basically give one a greater control. Again, I'm going to just kind of throw in some stuff that's not in the books all the time here. This gives one a greater sense of control and ability to confront and handle a particular area. We do it in a very systematic way that we've worked out. It's taken almost 15 years. What happens as you move farther up is handling things that are basically still been left unhandled, that are specifics that will then kind of free up and kind of blow apart an entire area. However, the amount of attention that one might need to give at that point, once you've kind of handled general areas and general terminals, the ones that are going to be remaining are the ones that are actually, stuff that your attention is still held on. Trying to treat everything with a high power and pulling each example up and, in every single incident you've ever confronted in your lifetime and many lifetimes, there wouldn't be enough time to actually make systemology an effective pathway to ascension and not just intellectual runaround. So by doing it in this very systematic way that has been outlined, we're able to take these steps actually much farther. It seems like it can seem sometimes like it's slow going, or like this is a lot to, like it should be able to just be done with like a mantra or a meditation or something, and that's it. But remember that even if such was the case and you were able to achieve that for a moment, that transcendental state is not going to remain any kind of permanent or even effectively totally release you from this physical universe unless you can work out exactly what it is that keeps happening to bring you back to this point. So that's what we've been systematically basically treating here. So the following is a routine which you would treat with alternation and then go to the next, treating with alternation, going to the next. There's, let's see, it's listed A1 and A2, B1 and B2, and it goes through E. And there's two examples of this. There's the one that we kind of do to kind of get again, introducing it and kind of a softer way, and then there's the more direct, kind of the ultimate process of which each one of the areas that we treat on the pathway, there was a particular process or a particular endpoint or a particular realization that all of that area was kind of tied to. However, just running that process or even just educating a person on that endpoint by itself wasn't enough to establish any like stable gains, just because they had like an epiphany at that moment, or it was like, oh, that makes sense or whatever. It wasn't enough to undo the circuitry of the programming and automation on which everything is still tied to. So although an individual could understand it on an intellectual level, it wasn't undoing, it wasn't enough. So what we then came up with was a bit of education coupled with a bit of exercises that all basically bring an individual gradually to a particular process, which then is intended, to have kind of this endpoint to it where everything kind of, the fragmentation falls apart, everything becomes clear, it's no longer a source of emotional turbulence. So that's the way it's laid out. So every time we're dealing with a particular area, whether it's holding back or invalidation or communication, or we talked about protest and change and various things in level 1, there's basically a certain point to which an individual can get to with each one that basically is like a handling of that entire point or that entire area. And then of course this is done incrementally in stages, and so we're peeling back in a way that again is systematically similar to the way in which it took place. Again, we're starting with what's accessible, where of course chronologically we would be dealing with what happened first in order to resolve it. Now that instead of trying to target all of that at once, we handle what's accessible and work back that chain to those original considerations, what we call postulates or alpha thought, in which the main reality agreement in that area was made, and everything afterwards were really subsequent considerations. So this is treated on a gradient scale. This does go somewhere. We've already completed what we have intended for our presentation of the pathway in terms of the materials that are available, the Pathway to Ascension volumes, the Fundamentals of Systemology basic course that we already covered, and then of course the Keys to the Kingdom advanced training course volumes. So right there we have what an individual would technically need access to have a full, complete understanding of the Pathway to Ascension and how to get there and what to do with all of this. So this is a pinnacle point here for our systemology. But so what have you done involving terminal or blank? What have you held back from doing involving terminal or blank? And those are the two that would be cycled again on that circuit. Then what has someone else or others done involving the terminal? What has someone else or others held back from doing involving the terminal? And even if you can't immediately recall something, a specific example, just consider it and think of how something might be or whatnot. And you might be surprised on where that actually stems from, just the fact that that was the quote unquote reactive example, that's considered imaginary, that came to your mind. So, what would you permit someone or others to do involving the terminal? What have you kept someone else or others from doing involving the terminal? What could you permit others to find out about you involving the terminal? And what have you held out from communicating about involving the terminal? What could someone or others let you find out about themselves involving the terminal? And what have others held out from communicating about that terminal? Now, if we're talking about that's actually almost the ultimate on that area. But if you want to be more direct, with the most direct PCLR, if you're solo processing, probably not such an issue. It's seldom how the one I just gave you is generally given first in traditional piloting, just because of, again, the wording on this one. Until a seeker and a pilot have like a certain repertoire or relationship between them of understanding and trust and so forth. This next series is probably the first, in what we've covered, where someone might, again, it's that cringe and that holdback that we're actually trying to solve here. It should be understood we're not really concerned. I've tried to explain this to the individuals that I've worked with on a personal level, and I said, it doesn't bother me. I'm not concerned what you've done. It's a concern to me that what you've done and your concerns about that are keeping you fragmented and holding you back on the pathway. So that's all we're trying to blow through here. So the direct PCL, what have you done? And what have you held back from doing? And the second circuits, what has someone else done or others? What has someone else or others held back from doing? And the third, what would you permit someone or others to do? What have you kept someone or others from doing? And what could you permit someone or others to find out about you? And what have you held out from communicating? And what could someone or others let you find out about them? And what have others held out from communicating? And these are labeled A, B, C, D, E because they don't directly, even though there are certain alternate and sequence and cycles like we've talked about in previous lessons, they're not necessarily reflective of the circuits directly. So as far as 1, 2, 3 in that order. For one, there's 5. And I showed you when we were talking about help and stuff, how there's various, others to others and others to self and self to others and others to themselves and so forth, and all those different cross flows. So we kind of take those apart, again, systematically, bit by bit. In Systemology, it's really easy to do when you treat it systematically, as opposed to, whatever the humans have been doing for as long as they have. So we talked about doing this, which is essentially our willingness to do, which is also our willingness to reach. In this point, we'll get into invalidation processing, which is really processing out invalidation. We're not invalidating processing. So ultimately, at the basic core of the matter, abilities of an alpha spirit can only be weakened or lost by one's own decision. These kind of decisions are sometimes known as postulates or alpha thought. They are the alpha spirit's prime decision for something to be or not be what it is. And we're talking about at the level of reality agreements here. This includes an individual's, what they are assuming as their own beingness, their own sense of self, and the decisions about what self is. In this case, we're generally dealing in levels 0 to 4 with the basic human condition. So although the actual decision rests with self, there's many ways in which the alpha spirit could be influenced to make those decisions. In order to be less, in order for self to be less than what self actually is in its true native original state, it has to, in some way, by definition, be invalidated. Its true, original, native, godlike state has to be in some way invalidated in order for it to become less than what it is. And again, we're just treating this systematically by definition. So the originating trigger or re-stimulation of invalidation fragmentation is usually from someone else or others. It's only when these criticisms or opinions are, for whatever reason, actually agreed to as reality, essentially made one's own from a high level of thought or postulate, that they actually will affect the self or alpha spirit. So what the other individuals say doesn't matter until we actually allow it to affect us. And of course, we're going back to stuff that we were told in grade school. But, well, here we are. This fragmentation prompts an individual to start validating the invalidation and therefore make it true for their experience of existence, for their reality. In common terms, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. So the individual now fully believes themselves to be incapable of an ability and thus essentially becomes so. And that's one of the things we have to systematically undo. And here we're still working in level 2, professional course booklet number 6, Escaping Spirit Traps, lesson 6 within Pathway to Ascension, volume 1. So this is where we have to start kind of looking at this, peeling this back. The proper way to develop, enhance, or gain an ability requires validating one's own successes, even when they're only small gains. Eventually, we want to be able to withstand invalidation from any outside sources, to confront their existence without agreeing to them ourselves. But we work again up to this incrementally on a gradient scale with our systematic processing, and to reach a point of, well, for example, an actualized individual would face all the criticism in the world and just be unaffected so long as they didn't consider self in any degree less, not even a little bit again. So this is an all or nothing kind of thing. Either it did affect you or it didn't. Even if you continue to, act as though it didn't, and it still did, or it's recalled reactively at any point in the mind, in regards to a certain area or when certain stimuli are presented, again, fragmentation. So a professional may make many mistakes, but the skill level increases when they are not basically invalidating the accomplishments that have taken place along the way. So a professional in sports, for example, continues their improvement by validating the many goals, hits, scores, whatever it is that they've made in their career. They don't invalidate themselves just because of a critical miss, in spite of the boos or the ridicule from others. And again, this would be a more actualized professional. Of course, not all professionals are, but in a state of fragmentation outside self-honesty, the human condition maintains a quite fragile sense of self-worth and certainty. The less actualized an individual is, the more easily their thought processes and actions may become unbalanced, and the more easily they may be led to invalidate whatever slight confidence that they have. So our goal is not to run from or avoid invalidation, but to emphasize validation of the good. That's simply how we're going to counterbalance it. And this is particularly important when you're working as a solo. Again, we've kind of directed the Pathway to Ascension professional course to the solo practitioner, although it's basically the same material one would use from, again, getting it from a co-pilot or a traditional piloting professional and so forth. So on our long journey down the backtrack of existence, we've experienced a great many things on both sides of the area of invalidation. And hence our processing must treat considerations derived from both sides. That means we've all participated in invalidating each other at some point or another. this even led to us being more susceptible actually to its effects ourselves. One reason we don't want to act in avoidance of invalidation is because operating in such a manner often includes holding back as a mechanism, and that generally, that to avoid any possibility of invalidation, it's going to hold the individual back from an entire area. And so our ability to confront is what will allow us to handle areas with more high-powered awareness, and therefore be able to handle them, defragment what's been there. And then the other flip side of this, we talk a lot about defragmentation, and the whole point of the education, the processing, and all of this is because this doesn't change, thereafter or in other lifetimes or so on and such. So the knowledge of how we have gotten into these spiritual traps that have entrapped us to the human condition is also the knowledge that's not only freeing us, but basically being used as a safeguard, preventative to falling into the same traps again. That's the whole reason I'm putting this forth. Otherwise, we would just put the books out and whoever makes it, makes it. But to be honest, this is something that we can all actually benefit from. This is something that the entire planet can benefit from, every individual on the planet, from basically sharing and creating a better reality. And it's there accessible to us, so to speak, heaven on earth, so to speak. That's right there. People are always waiting for something to happen to react to, or something to happen to them, in which case they'll suddenly be whatever it is they were trying to be or get to. And this is only going to work if you get yourself there. Of course, it doesn't mean you're all on your own, and we have assistance, we have the materials. I've spent 3 decades putting together to reach this point of communication and to try and bring it to individuals. So now let's just go into some quick processing here. Again, you're going to want to use, I just kind of run through the process in case I know, I can kind of tell if somebody kind of, if a point seems unclear or whatever, that's generally where I break and try to chime in some explanation that I think others can also benefit from. So that's kind of what I've been doing here, scanning your eyes with the text. So it's how could you avoid invalidation, and how could you attract invalidation? And then the other cycle with that, how could someone else or others avoid invalidation, and how could someone else or others attract invalidation? Here we're just trying to free up considerations. Okay, so this isn't a mantra, this isn't something you're praying for to happen, or so on and so forth. Processing, we have so many buffers in place that keep these things from just spontaneously manifesting at this point. So you've got to work all this stuff out systematically before you have any kind of concern over that kind of thing. And in the process, getting the education, again, very important. Why is it that you don't have immediate manifestation of those thoughts and so forth? Well, it's because you've inhibited yourself from having those because of the trouble it's actually gotten you into from time and time again. So the next process applies with analytical recall to the circuits. So you'd want to go back and look in, if that's unfamiliar to you, analytical recall, and then the various circuits. And it's recall invalidating someone, so you invalidating someone else. Recall being invalidated, so the inflow of being invalidated by someone else. And then the third circuit we split in 2, recall someone else invalidating another or others, and then recall someone else invalidating themselves. And then circuit 0, recall invalidating yourself. So now this process is actually a combination of traditional New Thought and our systemology processing combined, where one might start handling specifics. So the first PCL is, what might you be invalidated for? And once the seeker has an answer, they may be processed the following 2 PCL and run until some sense of release or release is experienced. Then you use the first PCL again to locate and run another invalidation. And again, invalidation, we just kind of like threw it up there as a word, but it means making less of something. In this process, we're also focusing on imagining the opposite of invalidation as taking place. So, validating an individual's true spiritual beingness as they are or appear to be. So, after what might you be invalidated for, the next one would be imagine someone else validating you for having it. And then imagine someone else having a similar disability or weakness, and then imagine yourself validating them for having it. And again, we're approaching the flow from a completely different direction here. And this is all, again, just imaginative, thought creations just for the purpose of freeing up those considerations. So, running processes for the conceptual areas of criticism and judgment is closely related to invalidation. Therefore, consider tolerable acceptance and rejection for all of those. So, invalidation, criticism, and judgment, we'll put So that gives you three basic areas or concepts for a particular terminal. But what we want to do first is actually, we were talking in level 1 about, we started talking about acceptance and rejection. And so ultimately in this area, because we talked about how, I just gave you a bit ago about how each one of the areas, we have a series of exercises that are basically meant to loosen up and increase the level of confront and actualization on something, and then there's kind of this ultimate that's meant to just kind of be treated once an individual would have no reservation about it. So you're running what invalidation or what criticism or what judgment, and you stick with them. You stick with one of them, as a cycle, and then when you kind of run that to an end point, or you kind of have that flat for that period, you'd go to the next. So what invalidation could you accept? What invalidation could you reject? And you just kind of go back and forth on that. Then go to criticism. What criticisms, again, could you, and that's all we're talking about is could you, again, not will you or did you or anything like that. We're simply freeing up considerations here. And then finally, judgment. So that covers that area.
The Joshua Free Imprint, JFI Publications, in conjunction with Mardukite Academy and the Systemology Society, present the single greatest breakthrough of the 21st century for all humanity. The perfection of a new standard systemology, a complete map for the way out from the bottom to the top, and your key to being an ascended master in this lifetime. Everything you need is contained in 3 progressive, self-guiding courses: the Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course, the Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, and the Keys to the Kingdom Advanced Training Course. And each should be studied and applied in their intended sequence and order as displayed in this video. All 3 courses combined are available as 5 standard hardcover volumes, but also as 33 installments, since each single course lesson is also available individually as a pocket-sized manual. The Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course includes Being More Than Human, Realities in Agreement, Windows to Experience, Ancient Systemology, A History of Systemology, and Systemology Processing. The Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, including processing levels 0 through 6, includes in Volume 1, Increasing Awareness, thought and emotion, clear communication, handling humanity, free your spirit, escaping spirit traps, eliminating barriers, and conquest of illusion. The Pathway to Ascension Volume 2 includes confronting the past, lifting the veils, spiritual implants, games and universes, spiritual energy, spiritual machinery, the arcs of infinity, and alpha thought. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 7 in Volume 1 includes The Secret of Universes, Games, Goals, and Purposes, The Jewel of Knowledge, Implanted Universes, and the supplementals Systemology Biofeedback and Systemology Procedures. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 8 in Volume 2 includes Entities and Fragments, Spiritual Perception, Mastering Ascension, Advancing Systemology, and the AT Supplement Systemology Piloting. All titles are available from your favorite bookseller. Explore new standard systemology today, and may you never be the same.